Shalom Avrocha from Yerushalayim. This is Charia Sprung, wishing everybody a good Chodesh, and this should be a Chodesh of great Shefa, Bracha, V'Hatzlacha, B'chol Mili Demeitav, in every good and fortunate way, in Gashmias, materialism, and Ruchnias, and spiritualism. This week's Parshas Noach, obviously arises a very important question. We know that the Ovis HaKadoshim, they are the founding fathers of Knesset Yisrael, starts with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yankov. And the question naturally arises, the Torah actually testifies that Noach was a Ish Tzaddik Tom Hoya B'Deirasav. From the simple meaning of the verses that we have in Parshas Noach, so we see that Noach was a great, outstanding person, and he was just about the only great, outstanding person in a corrupt generation. Why could Klal Yisrael not start with Noach? Why could there not be 4 founding fathers? So the title of the shir today is The Rejection of Noach as a founding father of the Jewish people. By way of introduction, we should like to introduce the pasuk in Yeshaya. Perik Nun Aleph, pasuk Aleph. The pasuk says, Shema Elai Roitvei Tzedek Mevakshei Hashem. Habitu El Tzorchu Tzaftem. Habitu El Tzorchu Tzaftem Ve'makeves Bor Nukartem. Habitu Lavrom Avichem Ve'oseret V'chalelchem Yechod Kirosiv Ve'avarcheu Ve'arbeyu. So the Navi proclaims, listen to me, you that follow after righteousness, people that are interested in pursuing the path of tzidkis, of righteousness, listen to what the Navi has to say. You that seek the Almighty, Mivakshei Hashem, a very, very important approach that certain individuals have to Avodas Hashem, they're Mivakshei Hashem, they seek out the Almighty. Look unto the rock where you were hewn from or carved out of, and the hole of the pit where you were dug and excavated. Habitu, look, El Avram Avichem, look unto Avram your father, and unto Sarah who bore you, for when he was but one, I called him, says the Rebbeinu Shloim, and I blessed him and made him many. So Avram Avinu, he is the founding father of Klal Yisrael. However, the context that Avram Avinu was introduced is quite relevant to contemporary times. In our times, there's an identity crisis. People don't know who they are. They don't know what they're questing for. They don't know exactly what they're looking for. We're talking about Jewish boys and girls. So the Navi addresses this issue, and he says, look unto Avram, your father, unto Sarah who bore you. Why? Because in times of an identity crisis, and we ask ourselves the question, it could be young boys and girls or older people. So we ask a question, what is the values? What are the values that we should identify with? With what personality and character should we make and establish as our role model to identify with? So the Malbim explains that if we have a stone and we have a doubt about the identity of the stone, so the only way we could solve this enigma is to trace it back to the mind that it was taken from. So we today have a solution. We don't need psychologists, we don't need therapists, we don't need psychiatrists. To our identity crisis, all we have to do is identify with the founding fathers of Klal Yisrael, and Rosh Veracious is Avram Avinu. And the question naturally arises, why was Noach excluded? Noach is from the few individuals whose righteousness, as we mentioned a moment ago, is testified to explicitly by the Torah. Amazing. Pasuk says, Eila told us, Noach ish tzaddik, tomim hoya b'deroiso v'esolim esalech Noach. Noach was a righteous man, and he was perfect in his generation. So what exactly does the appellation of tzaddik and tomim mean? So the Gemara in Zvachim, Kuf Tez Zayin, tells us, tomim b'drochov, tzaddik b'maisov. What does that mean? So Rashi says, tomim b'drochov onov v'savron. Noach was a very humble person and an exceedingly tolerant person. Tzaddik is b'maisov, in his actions, in all the activity that he undertook, he was righteous, he was a tzaddik. So the Marsha elaborates on the explanation of Rashi. And the Marsha says, Hadrochim, whenever we use the words ways, manners, hemamidos, avbazulas hamaisa. So this characterizes the character trait of a person's inner personality, his true core, his true substance of his inner personality. That's when we use and employ the term drochim. The Lashon tomim noifel al drochim, like it says, akel tomim darkoi. What about maisim? So maisim is noifel on tzaddik b'maisov. So we use maisim insofar as tzidkus is concerned. Lashon tzedakah, or you said mishpat tzedakah. So we see maisim is linked up with tzedakah. Noya maisa chesed, maisa tzedakah. So we see that Noach was especially delineated to be a great inner personality. He was tomim. He was an uplifted, spiritual, moral, ethical personality. He had no disjunctive features. He had no disjunctive feelings, sentiments. He was tomim, perfect in his inner personality, and he engaged constantly, consistently in charity and in kindness. And it's interesting when we speak about Kaviyachol, and it's as if we praise Kaviyachol, we understand we can't praise Kaviyachol, but when we have a pasuk that David HaMelech said in Tilim, so we're allowed to say some sort of interpretation. So it says, Tzaddik Hashem b'chol d'rochov, v'chosid b'chol ma'asav. HaKadosh Baruch was the tzaddik b'chol d'rochov, in all the midos, toivos, Yud Gimel midos sharachamim, v'chosid b'chol ma'asav. He's a chosid in all of his actions. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kind to us, saturated with kindness, all of his actions, all of his activities. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very generous with us. He allows us to participate and share in his existence. Finity, we are finite beings, and we exist in the kind, compassionate existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like the Zohar says. So these are the two appellations of Noach. So we see that the Torah testifies to the greatness and grandeur of Noach. This simply strengthens the question, why could Noach not be one of the founding fathers of Klal Yisrael? Why could he not be a role model? We start with Avram Avinu. Interestingly is that the Torah also records a pasuk where not only the Torah speaks of and testifies to Noach's righteousness, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he confronts Noach, praises him. And the pasuk says, "Vayemer Hashem leNoach, boi ato v'chol beischo el hatevo, ki oischo ro'isi tzadik lefonai b'dar hazeh." And Rashi says, we learn a certain hanhogya insofar as interpersonal relationships is concerned. So Rashi says, "V'lo nemar tzadik tomim, mikan shermi miksash v'achashadim b'fonav v'kula shlo b'fonav." Insofar as interpersonal relationships are concerned, so we do not praise somebody with his entire praise, only partial praise. That's why Kadosh Baruch Hu did not praise Noach when he directly communicated with him and called him Hiroisi Tzadik Tomim. He didn't say that. So we learn a halacha, so to speak, in Derech Eretz. And it's interesting that the pasuk says afterwards, Vayas Noach kechol asher tzivo Hashem. We have further evidence that Noach did everything that Kadosh Baruch Hu told him to do. So Rashi says this refers to the Binyan HaTeva. Noach built the Teva for many years. Rashi says 120 years. The onlookers were surprised. So Noach had to explain to the onlookers that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was set to destroy the world. While they derisively laughed at him, scorned him, ridiculed him. Despite all of these obstacles and the taunts, criticism, scorn of all of his contemporaries, Noach, says Rashi, did not deviate, did not distort from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's commandment. And when we analyze this, so we are simply overwhelmed. Overwhelmed that Noach had supernatural koychas hanefesh, the patience, perseverance, and determination to continue for 120 years and not succeed in changing the hashkaf and belief of one person. People like us, normal people, would have simply abandoned hope after a month, 2 months. How do we even contemplate somebody 120 years, every single day, endeavoring all day long to change the belief of people, to try to mekarev them, to do tshuva from their corrupt ways, and not succeed even with one person? So we can understand very well why the Torah says, "Vayas kechol asher tzivo Hashem," and Rashi says this refers to Binyan HaTeva. It is simply mind-boggling. And of course, there are opinions in Chazal that degrade Noach, that say that Noach was a tzaddik b'deirasav, but that is not an objective tzaddik. He was more or less a relative tzaddik. In his generation, he was considered a tzaddik, something which we do not understand, because Reb Nehemiah rejected that, and Reb Nehemiah said, "Uma im b'deirasav." Hoya tzaddik, in his generations, he was a tzaddik. Hoya b'deirashal Moshe, or b'deirashal Shmuel. Allah has come of the kama mashal tzeluchis shel afar semoy, mukefes tzmid psil umenachas bein hakfaros lo yarechai noitef. Vilu hoya chutz lekfaros Allah has come of the kama. So Nehemiah understood that there's no point in criticizing Noach and saying he was only a tzaddik relative to his generation. Why? Because he says very simply, if he was generous, if he was righteous, and we said a moment ago, he was a tzaddik v'tomim, perfect in his inner personality, full of love for all of humanity, kindness, tzedakah. So if he was righteous in such a corrupt generation, how much more so had he lived in the age of Moshe or Shmuel? And he can be compared metaphorically, Noach, to a tightly closed bottle of perfume lying in a graveyard, which nevertheless gives forth a fragrant odor. How much more so if it were outside of the graveyard? And when we analyze what Rabbi Nehemiah said, so we are mamish mind-boggled. It's mind-boggling. It says Lahedya, Vayara Lekim Esaretz Vinei Nishchosa, He Hishchus Kol Basar Es Darko Yalo Aretz. So they did the worst of errors. Afilu Behemo V'Chai Loif, even the animal kingdom is Gokul Sheina Mino. Ki Mol Aretz Chumos. The entire world was corrupt. And we believe Be'emunah, and it's also a nafkemino, there's ramifications, la halacha, when you learn the sugya in Klal Gadol of a tinoik shenishbo beino akum. So we see that an evil environment indeed creates evil people. Of course, a person always has freedom of choice, but nevertheless, the Greeks were already aware of the process of osmosis. Evil influences indeed make a tremendous impact on a human personality. And the worst generation, perhaps the worst generation of all time, was the Dor HaMabul. The world which Noach existed and lived was a world that had become utterly corrupt, a world in which all boundaries had been erased and all frameworks of law and order were totally discarded and rejected. It was a world of bestial desire, whose verdict was sealed, according to Rashi and the Ramban, because of Chomas. Rashi and Ramban say Chomas Gezel. More than any other Aveira, more than Arayas, more than Avodah Zarah, because this was an illustration of the loss of discipline and the uncontrollable desire to conquer others and take from them. Noach was not influenced one iota. Avram Avinu came from an agnostic generation, atheistic generation that didn't believe in God or monotheism, but the corruption on a moral level, totally immoral, that required that the world be totally destroyed, that was only the Dor HaMabul. And indeed, we understand very well the majesty and greatness of Noach, that he continued to be a tzaddik and a tomim in such an immoral world. Parenthetically, there's a question to be asked, and in my opinion, it's a bomba kasha. The Gemara in Sanhedrin brings down that every goy and all the goyim relate and associate to Noach. We have Zion mitzvahs and it's tavu b'nei Noach, and we bring Mikoiris, the sources for all of these Zion mitzvahs. The Zion mitzvahs are Gimel Averis Chamurais, Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayis, Shvichus Damim, murder. And then the Shlomo points out the other four are Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled. These are the basic tenets of civilization. Aleph, Zever Menachai, Beis, Birchas Hashem, Gimel, Gezel, and Daled Didin. So the Gemara attempts to bring sources from Parshas Noach for all of these Zion mitzvahs, these 7 mitzvahs that Noach, his children, all of his descendants are obligated to abide by. They have to abide by the will of God for these Zion mitzvahs. Rashi, Ramban say, "Vatimolei Oretz Chomos" was total ethical corruption, and it began because everybody else was interested in their fellow man's goods, to strip others of their rightful possessions. So we would anticipate when the Gemara in Sanhedrin Nun Zayin searches for a pasuk as a source for Gezel, it would bring down this pasuk, Vatimolei Oretz Chomos. Like Rashi says, Chomos means Gezel. Leinechtam gzar dinom ela lagezel. The doom of the Dara Mabul was sealed because of Gezel thievery. That's what it would appear. However, the Gemara is so unusual that it begs a question. My opinion, it's a bombakashet. The Gemara says in Zion, Gezel dechsiv ki yerek esev nosati lochem es koil. The Omar Rav Levi ki yerek esev lo ki yerek gano. So what does this mean? Where do we know robbery? That's the gimel of the Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet Ever Menachai Berchas Hashem. Gimel is Gezel. So the Gemara says, as the wild herbs have I given you all things. What does that mean? So Rav Levi commented and said, but not cultivated herbs, wild herbs, only those which grow wild without owners. That means, like Rashi says, hefkel, but not that which is cultivated, hence owned by a bailam. This is where we learn Gezel with a diuk of the Esav Asoda, as opposed to Esav that is cultivated and belongs to a bailam. You have a pasuk vatimolei haaretz chomos, violent thievery, a pele gadol. Very difficult to understand. Rashi and Ramban are mefarish according to Pshuta Shel Mikra, but it would appear that the Chazal did not learn this way, because if they did, they would, just like we bring the Shoches Kolbaso, just like we bring the Isur of Avodah Zarah for Ben Noach, and also Yudei Arayas from the Parsha of Noach, so we can bring Matimol Eretz Chomos as a source for Gezel. So, L'chura, we have to say a Chiddush, that be'emes, it's a specific type of Gezel. It doesn't mean thievery of goods, even though that's the mashmoyas of Rashi. That indeed is the mashmoyas of the Ramban. And it makes sense, that's what we use the term chomos for. However, it would appear that in this context, the Gemara, the Chazal understood chomos to be a specific type of thievery. What could it be? So we can assume and conclude that Parshas Noach and the Dara Mabul is a continuity of the final section of Parshas Bereshis, where the Torah tells us, "Vayiru b'nei holikim as b'noi Sodom." Elohim is Chayil here. It talks about Sarim and Shoftim. Ki toiva yisheino vayiktu lohem noshim mikol asher b'chovu. And Rashi says, "Av be'ulas Baal." Afazocha lehabeimo. So Rashi says, "Av be'ulas Baal." The Bnei Elohim, they somehow surrendered and succumbed to the beauty of the daughters of men, and this somehow or other exerted a tremendous influence on them, and this divested them of freedom of thought and action. And this led them to take kol asher b'choru, any type of beauty that appealed to them. They stretched their hand beyond limits, and they took anything that they wanted, even though it did not belong to them. So Rashi says, Avbulas Baal. Avbulas Baal. Pnei Yeshua in Kedushin already told us at the very beginning, also David Beis, that there's no issues by a goy. So if There is what we call a Ashes Ish Goy, and somebody corrupts her, violates her. So what Aver is the over? There's no Easter Ashes Ish because there's no Ishes Goy. So apparently the Penei Yeshua came to the conclusion that it must be an Easter Gezel. Because after all, she is set aside for her husband, and when he violates her, so he's over Easter Gezel. It's called Be'ulas Baal by Goyim Easter Gezel. That's what the Pnei Yeshua said. So according to the Chazal, that if this parsha is a continuity of the end of the parsha of Bereshit, the individual took Kol Asher B'Chavu, even a Eishes Ish Be'ulas Baal. So it could be that this is what the meaning of Chomas is. But Timolei Cholaretz Chomas, even Be'ulas Baal. So that Gezel is much stricter. It's more chomer than the Gezel of Mammon, which can be restored. So therefore, we cannot learn but Timolei Cholaretz Chomas Gezel of Mammon, because the Gezel this is referring to is a specific type of Gezel, which basically is a continuity of Sof Parshas Bereshis. L'chura, that's a teretz. Not like Rashi, not like the Ramban, but according to the Chazal, it would appear to be a teretz. Otherwise, we don't understand why we bring such a far-fetched pasuk with a diyuk to find the source of Gezel. So, in conclusion, we see Noach was a majestic person, a glorious person. And yet, on the other hand, in Pshutei Shel Mikra, we see something fascinating. It says, "Vayishoel ach Noach asher itoi bateva." Vayishoel ach Noach remained in the teva. So Rashi brings down the Medrash Chazal, and the Medrash Chazal says on this pasuk, Medrash Haggadah Goineach v'koyed dam mitoich habehemas v'achayis. He was constantly bleeding because he had to feed the animals, and there was also wild animals, beastly animals. There's those that said that if you would not, so to speak, serve the lion in its proper time, that the lion decided it has to eat, so the lion would attack him and he would be letting out blood on a daily basis. In other words, Noach constantly bled from being attacked by the animals on the teva. Terech HaTeva, the terech that he had to feed the animals. So therefore, the Chazal have a play on words. Vayisha ach Noach. His entire time he was on the teva, he said ach, it hurts, bleeding constantly from being attacked. Then Rashi brings down the strange pasuk. Hein tzaddik ba'aretz yeshula. There's no tzaddik that is not punished in this world. He has to pay yeshulam. He must pay, says Rashi, for his averus in this world. We just said that Noach was such a great individual, outstanding, and he had to be paid back through the vehicle of having been mandated to feed the animals for such an extended period of time on the teva, and their response was a response of violence, bloodletting, and this is in response to what says the pasuk, that this was some sort of payment that the Hashgach Elyono, that a Kadosh Baruch Hu exacted from him. And where we understand that it was a punishment. In other words, the teva was not only a salvation for Noach and his family, and ipso facto, a salvation of the entire world, but it was also a punishment, and we don't know why. We don't know why Noach, who found favor b'nei Hashem, should be punished. Noach, as we said a moment ago, was a tzaddik v'tomim. And it says, Noach motzah chen b'nei Hashem. So you do it the brisker of, how do you find chen b'nei Hashem? Noach motzah chen doesn't say how. Samar Nagris said this coincides with Rashi, People today want to have charisma, they want to have charm, they want to make an impact on somebody. They take courses, etc. No, it's not necessary. You said the brisker of you become a modest, humble person. Will give you charisma, will give you charm, will give you whatever you need. And on the contrary, you'll find favor b'nei Hashem, b'nei Hashem. The Charedim in Perek Samech Vov tells us, right? Should never get angry. In his heart, he should remove all types of anger, enmity, all of this disjunctive emotion, sensation, has a negative impact on a person's personality. And it doesn't say exactly how. The reason he was Motzachem B'nei Hashem, we can utilize the Motzachem Gam B'nei Yodom, is because he was Noach. He was a gentle, tender person. Bidi Buroi, in his communication, in his conversation, Ubimaisav, in all of his actions. He did all of his actions in a very tender, soft, sensitive way. He had an extra sensitive heart, and that was expressed in the entire realm and kaleidoscope of his actions and activities. His entire demeanor. And that's stated the Medrash Hanelam, the Zohar HaChodosh, Lamed Vav Aleph. L'cheinu Motza Chen. Chen v'Noach is one. He was a Noach. Noach Lashem, Noach Lebriya. So we do not understand exactly what took place over here. So it would appear that we would have to accept the opinion of the Riyah Kodesh. Sometimes b'derech hapshat we have to rely on the Balei Kabbalah. The Riyah Kodesh brings down also for the Medrash and Elam the Zohar that when Moshe Rabbeinu, after Cheta Egel, we will analyze it, a few moments that we have left, right? We will analyze it a little bit in depth, but at the end of the Cheta Egel, when Moshe is confronting HaKadosh Baruch Hu and imploring him for forgiveness, so he says, "V'imoyin mecheni non mesifrecho asher kasafta." If he refused mecheni, mecheni is made noyach. So the word that Moshe Rabbeinu used, mecheni, is made noyach, and the Riyah Kodesh said that is linked up with obviously the Haftorah that says he made noyach zois. That noyach was responsible for the mabul. He made Noach, so that's in this week's Haftarah. Why is it called made Noach? It could be called the Mabul. No, it was the Mabul of Noach because he was responsible for the Mabul. A Pella, Noach was responsible? And the Zohar says so explicitly. How was Noach responsible? True, the Pasuk says he made Noach Zois. We don't understand it, so in Dodo. How was Noach responsible? Mecheni is made Noach. So this is very esoteric. If we take a look at the entire parasha, so we see something which is very, very deep and very revealing about leadership in Klal Yisrael. After Moshe sees the Cheta Egel and he's devastated, nevertheless, he puts himself back, regains his composure, and the Torah tells us, "Vayachal Moshe es pnei Hashem elikov." And Moshe beseeched the Kadosh Baruch Hu. V'yom Hashem yechabcha b'amecha v'yitzchor la'Avrom v'yitzchok v'Yisrael avodecha shenishbato lahem boch. It's called the Seder HaTfilah, imploring HaKadosh Baruch Hu, begging HaKadosh Baruch Hu to forgive Klal Yisrael for the Chet Egel. Surprisingly, the pasuk says, "Vayinochem Hashem alavo shediber lasais li'amoy." HaKadosh Baruch Hu regretted the evil that he proclaimed to Moshe that he would do and implement to Am Yisrael, which was what? Achalo oisom techeg, I'll destroy them on the moment. Escha l'goy gadol, I'll make you for a great nation. Wonderful. Fine. Moshe Rabbeinu's tefillah, very powerful, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu now has nullified the Gezerah, cancel out the Gezerah. And then all of a sudden we see that Moshe Rabbeinu undertakes a new Seder Tefillah. And it culminates with the famous pasuk, Vayoshav Moshe al Hashem vayomer anochoto. And then we have the pasuk we mentioned a moment ago, Va'atom tisa chatosam mutar. If you will tisa chatosam, forgive them for their aveira, good. V'yimayin, if not, mecheni no b'sivcha asher kosafta. The Rashi says, destroy me, remove my name from the entire Torah. Even I would never existed. Right? And we know that the Gemara says that at that moment Moshe Rabbeinu asked that he should be destroyed and it should be considered like he never came into the world. So the question naturally arises, but the first tefillah that Moshe Rabbeinu said, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says black on white. He told Moshe Rabbeinu he forgives. So what did Moshe Rabbeinu have to daven again and come to such a climax in his tefillah? The answer is that Moshe Rabbeinu realized that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I would destroy them on the spot, that was literal. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was holding by destroying the entire Jewish nation after Chet HaEgel. That's what it means. Often plots. Everything. So first Moshe Rabbeinu attempted to nullify the Gezerah on a temporary basis. So that which the Torah says, that regretted what he said. In other words, he was mevatel the Gezerah. He canceled out the Gezerah. That was only the Gezerah of Achalo Isam Karega. Ultimately, they will be punished. For the time being, HaKadosh Baruch Hu reconsidered and decided not to implement a total destruction of the Jewish people. Moshe was aware of that. So then Moshe Rabbeinu continued, and Moshe Rabbeinu said as follows. What was the second part of the offer HaKadosh Baruch Hu made Moshe? In other words, that's the first part of the pasuk, total destruction of Klal Yisrael. But there has to be a Klal Yisrael. That's the purpose that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world for the Jewish people. I will recreate a Jewish people from you. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, I'm not interested in that. If you don't forgive them on a permanent basis, not just only on a temporary basis, because if there's no Klal Yisrael, there's no need for Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu is the paradigmatic example of what a leader is. He has no existence unto himself, not his family, and not his own existence. In the very depth of Moshe Rabbeinu's I exist awareness that we all have, so he didn't have the I. It was Klal Yisrael. He had no existence unto himself. It was the greatest existence par excellence that a leader of Klal Yisrael can have. He exists only for Klal Yisrael. If there's no Klal Yisrael, there's no need for a leader. There's no need for Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu is called Kula. His entire core, his entire substance is to be a leader of Klal Yisrael. There's no Klal Yisrael. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu said this sincerely, emanated from the depths of his neshama, and that's how he saved Klal Yisrael. The salvation of Klal Yisrael came about because Moshe Rabbeinu told HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if there's no Klal Yisrael, there's no need to have a leader. If I can't be mevatel the Gezerah, I am going with the Gezerah. On the contrary, I'm begging, beseeching, imploring you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that I should go with Klal Yisrael. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw what a leader Moshe Rabbeinu was, So he decided to save Klal Yisrael because through his leadership, Klal Yisrael will ultimately do tshuva as they did. Noach was the greatest man of his generation. And had he been in other generations, he would have been a great man. No question about it. Like Rabbi Nehemiah said, and that's Pshuto Shel Mikra. You could have Noach, Yesh Dorshan L'Gnai, you could criticize Noach, but predominantly, right, even with the criticism, Noach still was a great, great, majestic, glorious leader of the world. He was a de facto leader of the world because he was the greatest man there. He was the manik of his generation. The Zohar says he did not daven. One opinion is he did not daven to save the door. So we said a moment ago, he did more than not davening. He tried to be mekar of them through building the teva. And he endured ridicule. And nevertheless, with enthusiasm, every day he continued to try to be mekar of the generation. So that's more than davening. Of course, he was altruistic. He was a tzaddik tamim. Of course, he was interested in saving the world. There's no question about that. However, when he was offered the same proposition as Moshe Rabbeinu, that there will be a destruction of the world, but there'll be a hatzalah for you and your family. So he accepted the proposition. In contrast to Moshe Rabbeinu that said, if the Jewish people will be destroyed, I will go with them, because if I can't cancel the Gezerah, the decree of destruction, I go with them, so I have no existence unto myself. He was a great leader, altruistic to the end, except for one reservation. Not because of a lack of capacity, not because Noach lacked the ability. He could have done the same thing as Moshe Rabbeinu. He could have rejected the Hatzalas Atzmoi, the salvation of himself and his family. If the world be destroyed, I will go with the destruction. I have no existence upon myself. I don't exist for myself. I'm not even aware that I exist for myself. I exist b'teiras ish tzibur, for the world, to help them, for their salvation, for their redemption. So he simply did not have the sincere, genuine, depth, feeling that he has no existence if it wouldn't be for the world. He could not come to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu realized to save Klal Yisrael, he has to sincerely proclaim to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, take me with Klal Yisrael. And that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu measures the great leader. And it's worthwhile to save Klal Yisrael, have such a great leader, because Klal Yisrael will be raised to dizzying heights if they have such a great leader. That's something which Noach could not do. And that's why it says, Mecheni noy misefer chosher kosafto made Noach. Who made the tikkun for this lack of willpower to go with the gezerah, to go with the destruction of the world? If you can't save the world, Moshe Rabbeinu. And indeed, Noach is responsible for the destruction of the world because he had the capabilities, he had the capacities, he had it within him to come up with one extra level of saying, no, destruction of the world, I will go with that destruction. It was the lack of willpower. Question naturally arises that Avram Avinu learned from Noach, says Rashi. We learned from Noach, Avram Avinu, the valuable lesson that less than 10 people, you cannot destroy. If there will be 9 people, so 9 people will not be able to prevent the destruction of Sdom V'Amorah. So the question naturally arises, why did Avram Avinu say, if he can't save Sdom V'Amorah, he'll go with the destruction? He was very brave, courageous to pray for the salvation of Sdom V'Amorah. and you saw where there's not 10 tzaddikim, so therefore, just like in the times of Noach, if you don't have 10, there's no reason to save the world. So the answer is, when it comes to the destruction of Klal Yisrael, the destruction of a world, which is a total catastrophe, it's an annihilation in toto, so then a leader should have the willpower to say, if he can't save the generation, he can't save the world, can't save the Jewish people, he'll go with the Gezerah. For Zdaim v'Amayra, the first level of tefillah is adequate. It's just necessary for a leader to show his love of humanity and even try to save Zdaim v'Amayra. And this is the valuable lesson of leadership. We have a tremendous role model in leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, and this is something which unfortunately caused the destruction of the world, this lack of a willpower to come to that level. We have a lot of role models for leaders, and all of us should try as best we can to transcend our own ego, our own I-exist awareness, and live for the sake of Klal Yisrael in a genuine, sincere way, and we will bring about great redemptions and salvations. Thank you very, very much for listening. I hope you had a Tayalef.